Hey guys! So, as promised today, we are going to do story time and swatches. The story we're doing today is not mine. This story is Loki's, and she is here to approve the editorial process and make sure I tell it, I guess, the way she wants to tell it, even though she doesn't remember it. It's her favorite story, so she wants to listen in and make sure I tell it right, I guess. It's her absolute favorite story. It's Loki's a zombie story, I guess. And I'll explain why she calls herself a zombie. You'll get it by the end. But Loki, say hello.
Hi.
Loki's here. Hi. Okay. So the swatches we're doing today, my nail buddy Leanne sent me a gift, the Model 1 set. It's got a lot of nice blues and pinks in it, and she knows those are my favorites. So she sent me this set and said make something beautiful for you two. So this is what we're going to do with it. You guys get to see all the cool colors. I also have a spring set here of bright spring colors that I'm going to be doing too because it's a long story and we're going to need them. So let's get started. Now, when Loki was about 7 months old, this was back when I still worked at the club. She was 7 months old. Let me clarify that I was young and not the best parent. I didn't trust my instincts. I listened to doctors. And I don't know if that's because it was easier, and trusting my gut meant a lot more work, so I just went with it or what. I don't know. I wasn't in a great place in my life then, so I would like to think that I did the right thing, but I don't know that I did. So, when Loki was about 7 months old, one day, I got a call from my mom who was watching her and she said that Loki had a fever and she had some swelling on her neck. Let me, real quick, this all took place over about 3 days, like a short period of time, and it's not an easy story, so bear with me here. So Loki had a fever and there was a swelling on her neck. So I go home. I take Loki into the emergency room because I didn't have insurance and I couldn't really deal with I didn't have money to go to a pediatrician, plus, unless it was like for her regular checkups and stuff, plus with the fever and stuff, and the gland on her neck was swollen to the size of like an orange. It was very big. So I was freaked out. I didn't know a lot about raising kids. I wasn't raised by my mom, and I didn't see a lot of, good parenting growing up. So that's really pretty. That's a nice nude color. It's called Bear. So I took her into the emergency room. The doctor said it's just the flu. It causes fever and, glances, so it's not a big deal. As long as she's still eating, everything's fine. Now, let me just say, Loki was a very fat kid. There's very little that would stop her from eating. Like, a brick to the teeth wouldn't have stopped her from eating, and I know that because when she knocked all her teeth out, she didn't stop eating. So she was trying to eat in the actual emergency room, like throwing a wicked fit about it too. He said, as long as she's eating and drinking, okay, she's fine. Okay? So I took her home. Next day, it was getting a little worse, and she was, her color was kind of pale. So I took her back. They said, as long as she's eating or drinking, it's just a flu, you're overreacting. You need to calm down, whatever. Anyway, so I took her home. The next day, she was, she was really gray, like really pale, not just pale, gray. She was making a weird noise. When she breathed in and out, she was making a noise like it hurt when she took a breath. So I was hesitant to go back because I thought, they're gonna act like I'm crazy again. But her color was so bad and her lips were turning gray. So I was just like, you know what, we're going back to the hospital. Let me be clear, I lived a block away from the hospital. So I go to get her in the car. She's making that noise more and more often, and it looks like she's struggling to breathe. So it takes us about 4 minutes to drive the block to the hospital. And when I take her out of the car, her eyes are scanning back. Her eyes are just sweeping back and forth really fast. And she's very gray and her lips are blue. So I run into the hospital with her in her carrier because she was still pretty small. Well, she was 7 months old, and I kept her in her car seat, and I ran in, and the receptionist was paging for a interpreter for someone, and I tried to get her attention because I was freaking out, and she said, "Ma'am, just wait." And I said, "There's something wrong with my baby." And she said, "You're gonna have to wait your turn." So I started yelling. Another nurse came by and saw my daughter and said, "What's going on?" And I said, I don't think she can breathe, and this lady's ignoring me, and I don't know what to do." And what happened next is something I will never forget because I've never seen it before, and nothing has ever terrified me the way this did. The nurse grabbed the carrier out of my hands and just took off running. She didn't say a word to me. She didn't tell me to follow her. She didn't tell me what was going on. She just started running full speed into the back of the hospital with my baby. And the sight of that nurse, as scared as I was, is haunting. So they get her into the back, and they put her in one of those rooms with all the glass, the glass walls and the glass doors. And all of a sudden the room just floods with people. There are 20 people in there with my little tiny baby on this table. And I remember they were trying to get a tube in her throat, and they couldn't. Every time they would put the tube in, she would vomit up like bile, like just brown liquid, and it just kept pouring out. And they called in another lady, and a nurse, and I won't ever forget her either. Her name was Marla. While she was trying to intubate my baby, she was looking over at me and like trying to reassure me, telling me everything was going to be all right, which I thought was kind of weird, but So the next thing I see, also, this is the same hospital that I had been taking her to, and I was losing it, saying, "You guys said she was fine. You said it was just the flu. What's wrong with her? What's wrong with her?" And the next thing I see coming down the hallway is a chaplain. I don't know if you know, a chaplain's like a preacher. They don't bring the chaplain to see you for good reasons. So they finally got her intubated, and they said there was a lot of pressure on her lungs, and her heart was beating kind of weird, but they were getting oxygen to her. So they were gonna transfer her to the children's hospital, which was across town. So they called an ambulance. I still to this day will never forget that Marla lady. Like, she was the only one that could get that tube into Loki's throat so she could breathe after a few people had tried. So they get her loaded up in the ambulance, and we're just tearing across town. And they take us to Nationwide Children's Hospital, which is one of the best children's hospitals in the country. Hands down. People come from all over the country to have their children treated here. So they get her in, and this is where everything starts kind of blurring a little bit, So they take her into the emergency room, and she's there all of 5 minutes before they rush her up to the ICU, the PICU. And the next couple days are just rough. So they tell me that So they aren't quite sure what's wrong with her. They know that there is fluid in her lungs. Her lungs are full of fluid. Her heart, the sac around her heart is full of fluid. They don't know why yet. They're still trying to figure that out, but so they get her up to the ICU, get her all established in there, and she is under 24-hour watch. It's another one of those big glass rooms. 24-hour watch means that there is a nurse in the room with her at all times. They never leave. If they go to the bathroom, another nurse has to be in there while they're out. It means she cannot be unattended whatsoever. So at this point, they're just running tests, and then the next day, they after about 2 days up there, they figure out that she has a form of MRSA in her heart and in her lungs. I don't know if you know what MRSA is. MRSA is a deadly form of the staph infection. Have you ever had like a boil or an abscess? It's like that. So she had this fluid from this infection, like pus. Her lungs were completely full of it. And her heart, the pericardial sac around her heart was completely full of it. So they tell me we need to relieve some of the pressure around her heart. If we don't do it, she's going to die. Period. No ifs, ands, or buts. Her heart is going to stop beating. So, because of the fluid in there, her heart couldn't beat properly. It didn't have enough room. They said we have to put a drain in, or her heart's going to stop beating, and machines can't make it beat for her with that much pressure on it. So we have to put a needle in the sac around her heart to drain the fluid out. I'm like, okay, do that. Why are you asking me? Save my baby. What are you doing? They're like, well, because it's such a small space. If we put her odds of surviving getting the drain put in were 50-50, because if they nick the muscle around her heart, it could kill her. And no fixing that, it's done. And I said, okay, and if you don't put it in, they said she dies. I'm like, okay, then why are you asking me? Put it in. Like, do what you have to do. They're like, okay, we're going to get her set up in an OR downstairs. We're going to do it in the morning. I'm going to go check her out, and we'll get it all ready for us to put it in the morning. But then, as always does, he went to check her out in her room in the ICU, and all of a sudden, things start happening. When they went in to check on her, her heart had almost completely stopped. He pops out into the hallway to tell me, we don't have time to take her down to the operating room. We have to do it now. We have to do it here. Because the ICU at Children's Hospital is set up to do surgery in if you need to. So he said, we have to do it here. So all of a sudden, nurses are flying around, they're putting gowns on, they're getting surgical things, and I am losing my mind. Because how bad is it when they have to do surgery in her room? Not surgery, but you know what I mean? Like, they use like a scope and a camera to get it into the right place, but it's such a small area around her heart that the needle has to go, because it has to go in the bag, in the sac, but can't actually touch her heart. And on a baby, that's minuscule, right? So, they're all flurrying around in the room, and I'm in the hallway, and I'm watching. I can't see anything because she's surrounded by nurses and doctors. There are about 20 people again, because they pack those rooms, man. And I hear the doctor yelling at people. He's yelling at nurses. And he's being rude. He's being very rude. And I asked the nurse, I'm like, why is he being so mean to them? She's like, no, that's a good thing. If he's being rude, that means he's not concerned. She's like, it's when he's not being sarcastic and rude that you need to worry. I'm like, what do you mean? So I'm watching, and all of a sudden beeping starts happening, really loud beeping from her room. The machines are going off, and the doctor's yelling, and everybody's running around, and everything stops. Everybody stops moving, and they're all crowded around her, and it's like everybody's holding their breath. And all of a sudden, I see the doctor pop his head up, and he looks over and makes eye contact with me, and I'm just staring at him like, what? Because there's still no noise. And he just gives me a thumbs up, like this. And I fainted, just passed out in the hallway. Like, I legit fainted in the hallway. So I wake up, and they tell me that everything went fine. The silence that I heard was her heart beating on its own again, like all the alarms had stopped. Which they should tell you that. They should really make you aware of what that noise is. Anyway, so we're there for a few weeks. They have her in a medically induced coma. She's not breathing on her own. She's on life support. they've put drains in both of her lungs to try to pull that fluid out, to pull the infection out. They're also treating her with heavy antibiotics to try to get a hold of this infection. Now, let me also say that 2 years prior to this, my grandmother died of the same infection. She caught it in a nursing home and it killed her. So we've already had a run-in with this. Now, they're giving her all these antibiotics, and they're giving her pretty much the max that they can without killing her, without shutting her liver and kidneys down, because, you know, if she lives, she still needs those. And the doctors talk to me every day, and they tell me, you know, after about 2 weeks, they sit me down and talk to me and tell me, look, you need to start making arrangements. I'm like, arrangements for what? They're like, healthy adults don't survive this. So the odds of her surviving are 1%, maybe, if she's lucky. They said if she's lucky, she's one of the 1% that will survive. And if she does, she's going to be a vegetable because of all the seizure activity, how long, you know, her heart had stopped because of how long she went without oxygen. They said if she survives, she will be permanently disabled. She'll be a vegetable. Okay, well, I'm not going to do that. They're like, we're not saying that you have to give up on her. We're just saying you need to get things prepared in case. Talk to your son, because Alex was 4 at the time. He said, you need to talk to your son. You need to prepare him for the eventuality that his sister may not come home. And I'm like, I'm not going to do that at all. I'm like, you guys need to go back to work. You're in here talking to me and telling me stupid stories when you need to be working on my daughter. So they left me alone after that. Anyway. So now we get to the point where we need another surgery. They come and talk to me and they say, hey, so the drains aren't working fast enough. They're not pulling enough out because the infection had turned so solid in there that the drains just couldn't get them out. And they said there is a procedure called a VATS procedure where basically we go inside of her lungs and we clean it out. We vacuum it all out. We, you know, basically the way he described it, they're going to power wash her lungs and her heart. So I said, what about her heart? How do you do that? And he said, well, we have to cut the sac around her heart, and we go in and clean it all out, and then we close it back up. And I said, okay, give me the odds. What are we looking at? Like, will she be okay? Like, what are her odds without it? Because, you know, I don't want them cutting open my baby's heart, literally. He said there's a strong chance that the surgery could kill her, that she may not survive it either because her body's too weak or, you know, we get too close to her heart. There's any number of things that could go wrong. Said she's got a 60% chance of surviving the surgery. Said, okay, so if it goes well, what then? They said, if the surgery goes well, we're looking at very small odds that it will help. Because at this point, the infection's still spreading. If it gets to her brainstem, it's over. If it gets into her brainstem, if MRSA gets there, there's no coming back from that. Okay, so we discussed the options. They said there's a maybe 10% chance that the surgery will help, but it's our only shot at this point because we've done everything else. We've tried every medication except for some experimental ones, but I don't want to try that until we get the infection under control. I said, okay. So at this point, I trust this doctor. Dr. Samimi was his name. I trust him because he's been there with me the whole time. When she first arrived at the hospital, after about a week, I noticed that he never left. Not once. And I asked one of the nurses, I said, does he ever go home? She said, no. He's got a newborn baby at home, too. And he never left. He went back to the on-call room for an hour at a time and took a nap, and then he would come back and check on her. This man never left. And when I asked him about it, I said, why don't you go home and see your baby? He said, well, when my baby cries, I can't give her morphine. He said, so I'll go home when Loki's out of the woods. Anyway, so we had kind of bonded. He's been there with me this whole time. I trust this man, right? He said there's a 10% chance it'll help, but I think it's her only shot. So I said, do it. So they say they're going to take her back. They're going to do one lung, and depending on how she does, they're going to do the second one and her heart. They're going to do her heart first and one lung, and if she's doing well, they'll go ahead and do the second one. So I'm in the waiting room of the surgical center. And I don't know if you guys know this, but if they call you from the operating room, it's usually not good. You don't want to hear from the surgeon in the operating room, because it usually means something's gone wrong, it's going to take some extra time, whatever. So right about the time she should be getting done, I get a call. They said the surgeon wants to speak to you, it's urgent. So I go flying over to the phones. And he said, hey, just wanted to let you know she is doing great. We got it all cleaned out on the one side. We are going to go ahead and do her other lung and get this all wrapped up today. Like, okay, well, maybe say that. Like, maybe let the nurse who called for me know that she's not dead. I really think some of this stuff could be thought out better, because they scared me so many times. Anyway, so she's out of surgery and doing well. Now, the whole time that she has been there, I have been talking to her, promising her things, whatever, just to get her to wake up, right? Typical bargaining. I'm bargaining with God, I'm bargaining with whoever. Whoever will hear me, basically. So I told her, she was a fat kid. I told her, if you wake up, I will give you bacon, I'll give you donuts, I'll give you anything you want. You just gotta wake up and get it, right? So they make me leave the hospital for a break. They said, because I hadn't left the hospital at this point, and we've been there almost a month, I think, at that point. So they made me leave, so I decided, I still have another kid at home, I'm going to go to work for the night, because I had no money, I had no insurance. So I'm going to go to work for the night, try to make a little bit of money. Earlier that day, they had taken her off of BiPAP, which the machine that was breathing for her. They were going to try to let her lungs do its thing. Now, during this time, every day they're taking blood and testing it to see if the infection had stopped growing yet. It hasn't. It's still growing. But they wanted to try to let her lungs build up some strength if she could breathe on her own. So they take it off and she's doing good. So I go to work. An hour after I get there, I get a call that says she stopped breathing. We're putting her back on life support. We want to give her a little while longer. Okay. So that was a definite drawback. At this point, they come and talk to me and say, look, the infection's still growing. The surgery helped us get a hold of it, so it's not spreading anymore. It's not like running rampant. We've slowed it down, but it's not, we can't get on top of it. So we want to try an experimental medication, an experimental antibiotic. I don't remember what it was called, but it started with an L. So they said, we're going to try this, but it's never been used in a kid as young as her. However, we think this is our best bet because it's the only thing we haven't tried. It's still in the testing phases. We want to try it. And I'm like, okay, do it. Because at this point, she's still on life support, not breathing on her own, in a coma. All right, do it. They're like, now there's some side effects, or there could be later on. All right, what are the side effects? Well, she could have severe bone loss. She could develop liver and kidney problems later, because it's a very strong drug. And he said it could cause her bone loss later in life. I'm like, I don't care if you take all of her bones out right now and put them in a pile out front and pray to whoever over top of those bones. If it will make her better, do it. So they gave her the medication, right? So a week later, I get the word that it's working. The infection isn't growing anymore. That she's She's showing signs of strengthening, her white blood cell count is rallying, and her body's fighting. It's fighting back. So they say at this point they want to pull the medication that they had keeping her in a coma. They want to take the paralytic off, right? To see. So to be clear, she was in a coma, but they were giving her medication to ensure that she didn't wake up from that coma because she was intubated and it would be incredibly painful. So they said, we're going to pull it off and see if she wakes up on her own, to see if, you know, her body's strong enough if she's still in a coma, pretty much. I said, okay, great. So they said, now don't expect too much. You know, it takes some time for this stuff to wear off. It could be, you know, 12 hours, it could be 2-3 days, 12 hours, you know, whatever. I don't care. Take it off. 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 So I got super excited, thinking as soon as they pulled that IV out that she was going to pop up from, you know, nothing happened. So I'm upset, waiting. I wait all day just begging her to wake up because this was the test. Like, if she woke up, her brain was okay. If she woke up on her own, she was going to be okay, basically. I mean, we didn't know it would be 100%, but at least she would be conscious, you know? And that's all, that was enough for me, so I didn't care. So, wait all day, all night. About 6 o'clock the next morning, it's been about 24 hours. They're like, you gotta get some rest. You gotta go take a break. You know, get some sleep. I'm like, I can't do that. I'll go to sleep when she wakes up. So now I'm just dying. They made me go take a nap. So I go into one of the parent rooms to take a nap. I've been up for days at this point, waiting on her to wake up, and it's just not happening. And it's starting to set in that she probably isn't ever going to wake up. At which point I'm going to have to make a decision that I don't want to make. So I go and I lay in the parent room and I just cry. Like, I mean, I had cried before, but not like that. Not like just, there was just nothing left. There was nothing left we could do. It was up to her at this point. Like, it was whether or not she was strong enough to fight. And there was just nothing left to do but hope. And that hope was fading very fast because she still hadn't woken up. Finally I cried myself out after... Oh, did I mix those up? I mixed them up. I did. Oops. So finally, after crying myself out for a couple hours, or however long it took, just screaming, like, just, you know that cry? You know the one. When it hits you that your child is gone. And my boyfriend at the time was there, and he finally just, you know, held me till I passed out, basically. And about an hour after I fell asleep, the phone rang. And he said the nurse wants to talk to you. And I got on the phone, and she said, you need to get down here now. You need to get to her room now. So, take off running. The parent rooms were like right outside of the door, you know, outside of the ICU doors where it's locked, and I go beating on the door like it didn't occur. You have to call to get in, and I just didn't have the presence of mind to do that, and I'm just running down these halls, beating on the doors, and they let me in, and one of the nurses like runs back to the room with me, and I'm chasing her because I thought she was dead, and so I go in, and I look at her, and her eyes are open. Like, not like just her eyes are open, like she was aware, she was conscious, she was looking at me. And she still had the tube in her mouth, so, sorry. She still had the tube in her mouth, so She wasn't crying or anything. It was, you know, where they're intubated. But her eyes were open and she was grabbing for things. And she said she started waking up about 10 minutes ago, but I didn't want to tell you until I was sure it wasn't just reflexive movement. But she was very conscious and very awake. So they, a couple days later, they go to take the tube out because they're moving her to the infectious disease floor because the infection is gone. Just gone. And they move her down to the infectious disease floor. She's off. All the tubes are off, except for her feeding tube. And the IVs for her medication. Because they had her on, like, fentanyl for the, you know, everything. Anyway. So, we had the tubes off, most of the tubes off, and so now we're in the infectious disease floor, and they say, you know, they want to watch her for a few days, and they do, and after a couple days, they're like, well, we need to make sure that she remembers how to eat. So basically, they need to make sure that she still knows how to swallow. Because of all of the seizure activity and the time without oxygen, they need to know that, you know, she kept her motor skills. Now, she had been grabbing things and whatever, but they had her on a feeding tube this whole time, so there was no real way to know. So, they turn her feeding tube down to about half, and they have me start trying to feed her. She wasn't having it. The bottle would just sit in her mouth. Another point that I forgot to tell you, when they took the tube out of her throat, the whole time she had been opening and closing her mouth around the tube. And when they took it out, she said, Mom. She said, Mom, 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 Mom. She was just making that noise. When she went into the coma, she had not said her first word yet. She had not ever said Mom, and that's the first noise that she made was to say Mom. So I know she heard me. I think she heard me while she was under, you know? I hope so. Well, and as soon as she woke up, I hauled ass down to the cafeteria and got donuts and bacon. Even though she couldn't have it, like, they wouldn't let her have it because they're jerks, but I promised, I delivered. And that, we deal with the donuts again here in a little bit. So we're down on the infectious disease floor trying to get her to eat, and she's just not taking it. She just won't take it. So I'm like, she's a fat kid. She has to be hungry. Like, she's lazy. She's got a feeding tube doing the work for her. She has to be hungry, or she's not going to bother. Like, you know what I mean? And so they're like, okay, we'll turn it off for a few hours just to see if that makes a difference. So they turned it off for a few hours. And immediately, this girl starts wearing this bottle out. Like, she ate everything and then started screaming for more. Like, it was fairly quickly, too. Like, you would think she hadn't eaten in months. Which she hadn't, to be fair. So I went down to the cafeteria, and I got her a banana, and I got her a little plain donut, and brought it back up to her, and brought the nurse in to see, and, you know, see that she was eating. So a week after she woke up, I got to take her home, because I spoke to Dr. Samimi before I left, and I said, so what was it that finally worked, that finally got on top of it? And he said, honestly, nothing. Nothing we did should have worked, and nothing we did was working. Nothing was working. The medication that they gave her should have taken effect a lot sooner, but it didn't. And he said some people just, they rally back, you know, once it gets down to the wire and it's time to go, they decide it's not their time and they fight harder, and that's what she did. So when she was old enough to hear this story, I mean, not this story, I kind of, you know, toned it down a lot. I didn't tell her everything, but I told her, I was being silly one day, and I told her that she was my angel because she had been to heaven and come back. And she said, no, Mommy, no. I'm a zombie. Zombies die and come back. I'm a zombie. And then she did the terrorizing her brother with her little zombie act all the time, just, ah. She also thinks for some reason now that if God wanted her, he already had his chance. So now she's got a death wish. Knocked all of her front teeth. Like, the girl is constantly getting hurt because she thinks, if he wants me, he had his shot. It's my time now. But yeah, less than a week later, she fought back enough that she could go home. All told, she was in a coma for probably 2 months, I want to say. We don't know. They don't know where it came from. They don't know how she got it, because that kind of thing is something that you get with open wounds or something like that. They said it's possible she had the flu and it got into her blood and it, turned into MRSA. They don't know. They don't know how she got it, and they don't know how she got better from it, because she should not have. She shouldn't have lived, and if she did live, she shouldn't have been okay. And now she is 11 years old, and that vegetable thing that they talked about, she's got an IQ of 151, and she is in gifted programs at school. Some of you guys know of her, and you know what she's like, so you know that that's not an exaggeration. But, so, anyway, that is our story time for today. Sorry if I depressed you guys. It was a hard one, but that is the story of Loki as a zombie. And she also thought when she was like 3 that monsters couldn't get her, because monsters can't touch anybody who's been to heaven or they'll explode. So that's why she's not afraid of them either. Yeah, anyway, that's today's story time. Thank you guys for listening, and I apologize if you're crying. I am too. Loki's not, but, so, Loki, say goodnight.
Good night.
And thank you guys for watching.